Hi, you guys. Since there's been a lot of talk about staying well and making sure that we don't get sick, I thought I would read you a book about this little girl. She has a bad case of stripes. This book is written by David Shannon. Camellia Cream loved lima beans, but she never ate them. All of her friends hated lima beans, and she wanted to fit in. Camellia was always worried about what other people thought of her. Today, she was fretting even more than usual. It was the first day of school, and she couldn't decide what to wear. There are so many people to impress. She tried on 42 outfits. Is 42 a lot or a little? It's a lot. But none seemed quite right. She put on a pretty red dress and she looked in the mirror. Then she screamed, "Ah!" Her mother ran into the room and she screamed too. "Oh, oh my heavens," she cried. "You're completely covered with stripes." This was certainly true. Camellia was striped from head to toe. She looked like a rainbow. Mrs. Cream felt Camellia's forehead. "Do you feel all right?" she asked. "I feel fine," Camellia answered. "But just look at me." "You get back in bed this instant," her mother ordered. "You're not going to school today." Camellia was relieved. She didn't want to miss the first day of school, but she was afraid of what the other kids would say, and she had no idea what to wear with those crazy stripes. Can you imagine looking in the mirror and seeing your body and your face like a rainbow? That afternoon, Dr. Bumble came to examine Camellia. "Most extraordinary," he exclaimed. "I've never seen anything like it. Are you having any coughing, sneezing, runny nose, aches, pains, chills, hot flashes, dizziness, drowsiness, shortness of breath, or uncontrollable twitching?" "No," said Camellia. "I feel fine." "Well then, Dr. Bumble said, turning to Mrs. Cream, "I don't see any reason why she shouldn't go to school tomorrow. Here's some ointment that should help clear up those stripes in a few days. If it doesn't, you know where to reach me." And off he went. She's sticking out her tongue. Ah. The next day was a disaster. Uh-oh. Everyone at school laughed at Camellia. Oh, it doesn't feel good to be laughed at. They called her Camellia Crayon and Night of the Living Lollipop. She tried her best to act as if everything were normal, but when the class said the Pledge of Allegiance, her stripes turned red, white, and blue, and she broke out in stars. Uh-oh. That is different. What is happening to Camellia? The other kids thought this was great. One yelled out, "Let's see some purple polka dots." Sure enough, Camellia turned all purple polka dotty. Someone else shouted, "Checkerboard!" and a pattern of squares covered her skin. We learned about patterns. You You guys know what patterns are. Soon everyone was calling out different shapes and colors, and poor Camellia was changing faster than you can change the channels on a TV. Her face didn't look very happy. That night, Mr. Harms, the school principal, called. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Cream," he said. "I'm going to have to ask you to keep Camellia home from school. She's just too much of a distraction. And I've been getting calls from other parents. They're afraid those stripes might be contagious." Contagious. Now there's a word. We've had to learn about the coronavirus being possibly contagious, and we know that it is now. We'll talk more about that at another time. Camellia was so embarrassed. She couldn't believe that 2 days ago everyone liked her. Now nobody wanted to be in the same room with her. They were afraid she was contagious and they would get the stripes and the colors too. Her father tried to make her feel better. "Is there anything I can get you, sweetheart?" he asked. "No, thank you," sighed Camellia. "What I really wanted was a nice plate of lima beans." But she had been laughed at enough for one day. Well, yes, I see," said Dr. Bumble. He mumbled when Mrs. Cream phoned the next day. "I think I better bring in the specialists. We'll be right over." About an hour later, Dr. Bumble arrived with four people in long white coats. He introduced them to the Creams. "This is Dr. Glop, Dr. Sponge, Dr. Cricket, and Dr. Young." Then the specialist went to work on Camellia. They squeezed and jabbed and tapped and tested. It was uncomfortable. "Well, it's not the mumps," concluded Dr. Glop. "It's not the measles," said Dr. Sponge. "Definitely not the chicken pox," put in Dr. Cricket. "Or a sunburn," said Dr. Young. "Try these," said the specialist. They each handed a bottle filled with different colored pills. "Take one of each before bed," said Dr. Glop. Then they filed out the front door, followed by Dr. Bumble. That night, Camellia took her medicine. It was awful. Then she woke up the next morning. She did feel different, but when she got dressed, her clothes didn't fit her right. She looked in the mirror, and there, staring back at her, was a giant multicolored pill with her face on it. Oh no! Look at Camellia. She doesn't look like herself. She looks very different. Dr. Bumble rushed over as soon as Mrs. Cream called. But this time, instead of the specialist, he brought experts. Dr. Gord and Mrs. Mellon were the finest scientific minds in the land. Once again, Camellia was poked and prodded, looked at and listened to. The experts wrote down lots of numbers. Then they huddled together and whispered. Dr. Gord finally spoke. "It might be a virus," he announced with authority. Suddenly, fuzzy little virus balls appeared all over Camellia. Oh my gosh. "Or possibly some form of bacteria," said Mr. Mellon. Out popped squiggly little bacteria tails. "Or it could be a fungus," added Dr. Gord. Instantly, Camellia was covered with different colored fungus blotches. The expert looked at Camellia, then each other. We need to go over these numbers again and back to the lab. Dr. Gord explained, we'll call you when we know something. But the experts didn't have a clue. The experts didn't have a clue, much less a cure. Poor Camellia. By now, the TV news had found out about Camellia. Reporters from every channel were outside her house, telling the story of the bizarre case of the incredible changing kid. Soon a huge crowd was camped out in the front on their lawn. Everyone is very curious and they want to show her on the news. The Creams were swamped with all kinds of remedies from psychologists, allergists, herbalists, nutritionists, psychics, and medicine men, and gurus, and even a veterinarian. Each so-called cure only added to poor Camelia's strange appearance until it was hard to even recognize her. She sprouted roots and berries and crystals and feathers and a long furry tail. But nothing worked. Oh my goodness. Can you see that's Camellia sitting there on the chair? You can't even recognize her. She doesn't even look like herself. One day, a woman who called herself an environmental therapist claimed she could cure Camellia. Close your eyes, she said, breathe deeply, and become one with the room. I wish you hadn't said that, Camellia groaned. Slowly, she started to melt into the walls of her room. Her bed became her mouth. Her nose was a dresser, and 2 paintings were her eyes. The therapist screamed, "Ah!" and ran from the house. What are we gonna do? Cried Mrs. Cream. It just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And then she began to sob. What is going to happen to our poor daughter? At that moment, Mr. Cream heard a quiet little knock at the front door. He opened it, and there stood an old woman who was just as plump and sweet as a strawberry. Excuse me, she said brightly, but I think I can help. She went into Camelia's room and looked around. My goodness, she said, with a shake of her head. What have we here? It's a bad case of stripes. That's what it is. One of the worst I've ever seen. She pulled a container of small green beans from her bag. Here, she said, these might do the trick. Are those magic beans? Asked Mrs. Cream. Oh my, no, replied the kind old woman. There's no such thing. These are just plain old lima beans. I'll bet you'd like some, wouldn't you? She asked Camellia. Camellia wanted a big heaping plate full of lima beans, more than just about anything, but she was still afraid to admit it. Yuck, she said. No one likes lima beans, especially me. Oh dear, said the old woman sadly. I guess I was wrong about you. She put the beans back in her bag and started towards the door. Camellia watched the old woman walk away. Those beans would taste so good, and being laughed at for eating them was nothing compared to what she'd been going through. She finally couldn't stand it. Wait, she cried. The truth is, I really love lima beans. I thought so, said the old woman with a smile. She took a handful of beans and popped them into Camelia's mouth. Said Camellia. Suddenly, The branches, feathers, squiggly tails began to disappear. Then the whole room swirled around. When it stopped, there stood Camellia, and everything was back to normal. I'm cured, she shouted. Yes, said the old woman. I knew the real you was in there somewhere. She patted Camellia on the head. Then she went outside and vanished into the crowd. Afterward, Camellia wasn't quite the same. Some of the kids at the school said she was weird, but she didn't care a bit. She ate all the lima beans she wanted, and she never had even a touch of the stripes again. The end. I like that story. It talks about being yourself, and that's how we should be, ourselves. It was good to see you. Till next time. Bye-bye.